Welcome to the MIT D-Lab Practical Impact Alliance Participatory Design online course. My name is Kendra Leith, and I'm going to talk to you about some participatory design cases, some different examples of different types of participatory design. But before I get into that, I just want to remind you of the participatory design spectrum. So we have design for, or user-centered design, in which stakeholders are consulted. They might participate in interviews or focus groups or give you feedback on your ideas. We also have design with, or co-design, in which stakeholders are part of the design team. They work alongside designers to create a solution to a challenge that they're facing. And then we also have design by, or user-created design, in which we likely build the capacity of stakeholders to be able to generate solutions themselves to the challenges that they're facing, without necessarily working side by side with other outside designers. So these are three different types of participatory design. I should say that programs, projects, organizations move along the spectrum. One way is not necessarily better than another. It really depends on the goals you're trying to achieve. And so now we'll jump into a few different examples of these different types of participatory design. So our first example on user-centered design comes from IDE, or International Development Enterprises. And this is a latrine project in Cambodia. So before this project began, IDE discovered that the rural sanitation coverage was low. They estimated it around 23%. And although some of the needs were being met through the private sector, there was still a lot of unmet needs. And in a lot of cases, the products that were available were not necessarily very responsive to the user requirements. And so IDE decided to tackle this particular solution and create a better latrine. So they worked with a number of different people, including Jeff Chapin, who was formerly of IDE, as well as IDE staff, and as well as colleagues from the Ministry of Rural Development, Lean Aid, and Rainwater Cambodia to generate a particular solution. And they did this with support from USAID Cambodia, the Micro, Small, and Medium Enterprise Project, and the Water and Sanitation Program at the World Bank. These two programs supported this particular project financially. And so they created the Sanitation Marketing Pilot Program, and really IDE set out to create a product that would better meet the needs of the users, be affordable, and be available in the areas that needed these solutions the most. So they engaged a variety of different people in this type of process. They engaged individuals, households, communities, and society. So I should say that users fit into all of these different categories, but often into individual categories. So understanding, through things like interviews and focus groups, what are their needs, their preferences, what are the potential challenges that they're facing, etc. But IDE also felt like it was important to engage households and understand the household decision-making dynamic. Who makes the decisions? How does that happen? So this was a critical component as well in understanding what are some of the household level issues. They also engage people from the communities, so people like the village chiefs, recognizing that in order to be able to sell products in these locations, they would have to get buy-in from the chiefs as well. They also engaged other people like monks, who were trusted leaders in the community, who might be able to help convince end users that these products made sense, and that encourage end users to be able to buy into these particular products. They also engaged members of society, governments, other businesses, supply chain actors, etc., to make sure that products could also get where they need to go. So people were engaged throughout this process, through interviews, through focus groups, really in order to be able to get buy-in so that IDE would be able to sell this product and that customers would purchase a product that they actually needed. So they ultimately ended up creating the Easy Latrine, which built upon an idea from a design from India, which was a pour flush latrine. And they ended up developing a very useful, relevant product that actually received an award from the Industrial Designers Society of America for their design. And what they ended up creating was a higher quality product that better met the needs of the end users. And to this date, they have sold over 200,000 latrines in Cambodia. So this is an interesting example of user-centered design where they engage people in interviews and focus groups, engaged a variety of different stakeholders throughout the process to generate a solution that really met the needs of the end users. Now I should say that this is our user-centered design example, but IDE also engaged in co-design workshops, particularly through their implementing partners. So as you see here, people don't always use one type specifically of participatory design, but may move to different types depending on what they're trying to achieve. So we'll now jump into an example from co-design, Coffee Bean Sheller in Tanzania, which is from our International Development Design Summits, which are 2 to 4 week long summits in which people learn about the design process and work on a challenge together. And this example is from a design summit in Tanzania. And one of the challenges was trying to figure out how to improve the coffee bean shelling process. So this process can be arduous, it can take time. It's often done with a hand-powered crank. And so I wanted to see if there was a way to potentially address this particular issue. So there was a team that was put together, including Mwana Harisi Goa, who you see on the bottom there, who's a farmer, an innovator, single mother from Morogoro, Tanzania. And she worked alongside other team members, engineering students, business students, etc. And they talked to a number of farmers to be able to generate an alternative solution. So farmers were engaged throughout the process in interviews and also actively developing the prototype. And ultimately, they ended up coming up with a solution that attached a bike frame to this particular hand-powered sheller, which enabled them to really increase their productivity, able to reduce the amount of time for shelling by a factor of 5. So really seeing major increases in productivity. But the interesting thing here is that not only were there changes in this technology, there are changes in the people as well. So Mwana Harisi took what she had learned at this particular summit and applied it to challenges in her home community. She created a palm oil press using some of the skills that she had developed at the design summit. So you start to see changes in not only in the technologies, but also in the people. And so I'm now going to give you an example of user-created design in which we're going to talk about water carts and rat traps from Uganda. And the user-created design is often implemented through our creative capacity building training programs, which are 2 to 5 day long trainings on the design process, where people also build up their woodworking skills and metalworking skills, and they work on a potential solution to a challenge that they're facing. So one of our first CCBs happened in Pader, Uganda. And Uganda had suffered from decades of war, and millions of people had been internally displaced in the country. And as they were getting ready to return to their home communities, there had been a request from the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee and DLAB to do a technology demonstration with some of the internally displaced people. What our team found, though, was that the fabrication facilities for these technologies were not actually available. And so they decided to teach people about the design process and create these technologies through the design process. So they use things like groundnut threshers and charcoal presses to illustrate examples of the design process and also encourage people to create these technologies as well. So people left the training with additional skills in these areas, but also with the technologies. But what we found when my colleagues returned 6 months later to this particular community was that people had created other solutions. They had created rat traps to protect their food. They had created water carts to transport their water and had turned that into a business. Some of the women had decided to charge people to transport their water as well. The interesting thing here too is not only were people creating new technologies, but they also were feeling more empowered and able to solve their own challenges, to generate solutions that were relevant to them, to use tools and machines. And this is something that was uncovered by my colleague Kofi Taha in his thesis. So you start to see that there are changes through the technologies and improvements to technologies, but also changes in the people as well. So this is a critical component. And then finally, as I mentioned with the IDE example, it's often the case that people use different types of approaches depending on what they're trying to achieve. So this is an example from Moringa Connect. Moringa Connect is a company that's based in Ghana that was created by a DLAB MIT alum who's from Ghana, who recognize the value of the moringa tree. Oftentimes, moringa is used in local cuisine. The drumstick part of it gets consumed. However, there are other parts of the tree that also have value. So the leaves can be crushed and made into nutritional supplements or tea, as you see here. And then the seeds can also be pressed and made into oil. The oil can be extracted, which can be used in cosmetics and hair products. So Moringa Connect recognized that there is a lot of value from these particular trees and has created a business around it. And they have used all 3 different types of participatory design approaches. They have used user-centered design through a hand and foot-powered moringa sheller in which they engaged farmers to generate a better solution. They've also used co-design, working with their agricultural extension officers to develop solutions and data collection systems that were more efficient and enable them to collect data that was more useful, reducing the burden on the farmers, and ensuring that that data was actually going to be used. And then finally, they have used user-created design, in which one of the farmers they had worked with, they had built some capacity there. This particular farmer worked on a grid to remove the wings of the shell without damaging the seed or shell. So as you can see here, Moringa Connect, depending on their needs, used a variety of different types of approaches. And we will talk about when you should select which particular approach in a later session. This just gives you some examples of different types of participatory design approaches. Before we conclude today, I just want to acknowledge the sources that we've referenced here. We've referenced a number of print materials from IDE, a working group output from the Practical Impact Alliance, an article and a thesis from our staff here at DLab, and also an article from a staff member at Smithsonian Magazine. We've also incorporated content from interviews, presentations, emails, conversations with a number of people, including Abby Neidham and Yi Wei from IDE and Kwame Williams from Moringa Connect. And we just want to acknowledge their contributions. Without this content, this presentation would not have been possible.